Hi, Steph. How are you doing? I'm really excited to talk today because it's Autism Acceptance Month, isn't it? And it's so nice to be able to collaborate and to, bring a new awareness to what we do, because we've just been chatting, haven't we, about how language is so important in the pool around when we are helping our autistic families. But also we were talking about how much we can really widen that awareness. We don't always have to think about individual needs, isn't it? It's almost like everybody can benefit from being a little bit more sensory aware.
Yeah, absolutely. As we were saying just a minute ago, the small changes and the adaptations that we put in place, sometimes specifically to benefit our autistic swimmers, generally benefit everybody within the class anyway. And if we can all make our teaching that little bit more inclusive, then why wouldn't we do it?
Yeah, definitely. So if I was going to ask you, what are your sort of favorite 3 top tips that we can apply in our baby in our early years swimming? Because it'd be really nice to gain, from your perspective and your experiences.
My big thing is regulation first.
Yeah.
Because if we're not well regulated, then we can't learn.
Yeah.
My favorite example that I've been talking to some of my mentees about lately is queuing in the post office. I know it's not swimming related.
Yeah, I love analogies, so go for it.
We're all familiar with queuing in the post office. There's
Yeah.
always a queue, and some days we can stand in that queue for as long as it takes, and it doesn't matter. But if we've had a busy day, if we've had a stressful phone call, or we've only got a small amount of time left on the car parking and we're stood in that queue, we get really frustrated. We can't, our ability and our capacity to stand in that queue changes. And it's not about the queue itself, because the queue is always the same. It's about how we're feeling and how well regulated we are. So we often find that sometimes children they've got the ability and they can show a skill one time, but they may not show it another time. And I really think that links back to how well regulated they are. Because if we're well regulated, then it increases our capacity. And it even increases our capacity to tolerate the things that we don't even like that much.
Yeah.
But definitely for learning. So I do really, I really advocate putting a form of sensory circuit as the warm up.
Yeah.
So that there's that baseline of regulation before you start. And then as you get to know each of the children and their sensory preferences and what calms them, what excites them, what gets their brain working, you can then cherry pick little things. If you notice that they need a bit more amping up or they need a bit more calming down, you can say, oh, why don't you do some pushes in the float over here? And we'll see if we can bounce the ball off the float.
Yeah,
Little things like that.
No, that's really, really nice. And I'm just really relating that to a lot of parents when they ask about their babies as well. And it's so important to really think about the timing, because if they've had a lot of sensory experiences, even going to the supermarket, they're soaking it all up. And then obviously it's swimming, they're almost a little sensory regulation cup is just overfilled, isn't it? Or if it's towards the end of the day, we've only got so much capacity. And even myself, towards the end of the day, I like a lot more quiet time. And you can only have so much sensory, because I think sometimes we think it's also good and it's also positive, but it is really nice to remember that sometimes sensory does aggravate ourselves. It does agitate the senses if it's just too much too quick, really. So that's lovely to know.
Yeah, having that reset and that pause, and then we can begin what we're doing. It's setting yourself up for success, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And for babies,
setting our swimmers up for success.
Definitely. And for babies and parents, again, just a reminder that it's co-regulation. So a baby is very much almost like borrowing the parent's nervous system. So my sensory circuit for parent and baby starts out the pool to regulate together, to look at cues, body language, sensory states in the pool to get sort of grounded. So again, we're regulating and breathing together. But I love, as you say, the push and the pull and the ball and the float. That sounds really, you could really observe what exactly children need.
Yeah, and in that observation, you can see some children, you might think, oh, they're pulling on the lane rope, they shouldn't be doing that. It's about reframing that and thinking, well, why are they doing that? Children are so good at meeting their own internal needs without really understanding the processes behind it. I think as adults, we don't really fully understand the processes behind it. But if we're noticing that a child's constantly going underwater or they're constantly spinning in circles, we're observing what it is that they get from that, what they need, and fulfilling that need in a way that also meets aquatic purpose, and then it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, exactly. And so it's working with the senses, isn't it, rather than against, really. And it can just be a really short period of time, isn't it? The sensory systems have got what they needed, bouncing up and down, or a little bit of quiet time, and then it's open again, ready to
yeah, then again. Off we go. And it's also really empowering for parents as well if we give them that information and say, oh, I noticed that, and have you noticed that anywhere else? And here's what we can do. If this works in the pool, maybe you could try this at home.
Yeah, definitely. And would you say that regulation, one of the sort of anchors could be a simple sort of breath work together, really, using our breath?
Absolutely. And breathing is one of the first things a parent can notice about their child. For their change in regulation state, they might notice that their breathing starts to get amped up. So that's a really good indicator that we're moving away from that baseline. So that's a really good opportunity for a parent to check in with their child, to offer some co-regulation, whether they're breathing like next to their child's ear, holding them close so the child can hear and feel the parent's breathing. And as that child gets older, they can then have that open conversation. I noticed that your breathing's getting faster.
Yeah.
Could it be that this is a bit exciting? Could it be that you're feeling a bit worried? Oh, can you feel my breathing? My breathing's nice and calm. Can you copy that?
Oh, I can really visualize that as well, because in the pool I always think about the water, and we're in such a magical place because when we're breathing in water, we've got that visual response back, haven't we, which is so different on dry land. So I always think how fortunate we are being in the water and having that receiving, that almost like flow forward and back. We can see our breath, can't we, in water?
Absolutely, and it's a lot easier to feel our chests expand and contract in the water because we've got that lovely extra feedback from a hydrostatic pressure.
Yeah, definitely. And for myself, what I always say to parents with babies is the breath is really important, and you can really feel their heart rate, but the skin is such a visual reminder, and we will get skin color changes, whether or not that is a draining of the skin and we go very pale, or the opposite, actually quite flushed as well. So being the biggest organ, it's a really almost like gives us a good picture of what's happening inside. And for us as well, we can flush suddenly if we get a little bit of a startle or a shock, or we are unsure of things. So it's just good, isn't it? All of those cues, it makes up a big picture rather than just one thing.
Yeah, and with our perhaps our slightly older preschoolers, beginning to have those conversations about the feelings that are similar, that you get a similar response out of, but they might be different. So were you feeling worried or were you feeling excited? Sometimes they can feel similar.
Yeah.
What do you think it was? And sometimes that can be a really good way to bring them back if the child is thinking that they were worried about something and confusing that with excitement. That can be really good. if we're encouraging, say, something that could turn into an anxiety trigger in the future, for example, jumping in.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you got any sort of favorite resources that you could overlay and really support, you know, children that are having a few sensory challenges or need a little bit more of a, you know, to get amped up in the pool, using your words?
So I love to stick with our hand picking from
Yeah.
our alerting, organizing, and calming activities.
Nice.
So always having a selection in the toolbox from each section.
Yeah.
And although traditionally people will start their sensory circuit with an alerting portion, some of our children come into the pool and they're already, to use my own words again, quite amped up.
Yeah.
They're quite, you know, they're excited, they're happy to be there. And we might need to start at the calming section and then loop back round. So we might start with a calming activity, then go back to alerting, organizing, and then finishing with another calming one. And then just noticing where they are at various points in the session and, you know, suggesting, oh, you know, they seem a bit lethargic here. What can we do to amp things up? Let's do some horsey. Let's do some bouncing. I do have a written go-to, which is available for people as a standard warm-up, which can be used with parents and children in the winter, or it can be used for independent lessons. Just incorporating 3 activities from those things, which is really, really my go-to at the start of every session, because if it's 5 minutes, that buys you 25 minutes of focus, which is a lot for young children. It's a lot to expect 25 minutes of focus, but if that keeps a child on task even for 10 minutes, then that's great. That's a win as far as I'm concerned, and that's time worth spending.
Yeah, and I think you're completely right that we forget, and we just sometimes need to be reminded that in order for the body to feel still, it needs a little bit of dynamic movement before, and then actually we can rest in. And children, you know, have to be still and focused, particularly at school or learning environments, so much, don't they? And you know, when we're young and we our bodies are still developing and our regulatory systems are still developing, you know, we underestimate how much movement, how much sensory input we need to be able to you know, be dynamic, to then we actually then can be focused and still. So it's that sort of rhythms really in the pool, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you've just reminded me of something really important, which is particularly pertains to our neurodivergent swimmers, that we might not necessarily know they have a form of neurodivergence. But and that is that listening isn't always a sitting still activity, and in fact for most of it's not. So if we have a child that's all fidgety, if they're safe, we have to really ask ourselves, is it a problem? Because that might be how they listen best. That might be how you're going to get the best out of them, is if they're having a little wiggle, or if they've got something in their hand and they're having a little fidget, or maybe they're not even looking at you. Because looking at the person whilst they're talking can be quite distracting. So another really, really good thing for swimmers like that, and also if we've got any deaf swimmers too, or hearing impaired swimmers, is to really separate the action from our verbal instruction.
Yeah, that's really
so
good.
We're giving them the opportunity to look and then listen, or listen and then look, but not necessarily the two at the same time.
Yeah. And would you also incorporate any type of sort of visual cards or story cards?
Absolutely. I think that visual schedules now and next boards are really, really helpful tools. They're really, really helpful for managing anxiety. For some children will spend the whole time distracted, worrying about, well, what if I have to? So if they can see what's coming next, it's a lot easier to focus on the now task. Oh, now I'm kicking. Next, we are playing chase the fishy. So that removes anxiety from the situation of, well, what if next I've got to get out, or what if next I've got to go under the water, or what if next I've got to go on my back. They know what's coming, and then pairing that with a visual timer. So even if it is an activity that they're not that keen on, knowing visually that they've only got that small pocket of time that they have to do that activity in, and then they're on to the next thing. Because again, saying 2 minutes to someone, or 1 minute, or 30 seconds, it doesn't really mean a lot. There's no meaning attached to it. So it's really, really helpful to back that up with a visual timer. And it's only till the sand reaches the bottom, or the liquid reaches the bottom. Or for our older swimmers, I'm only doing this while the big hand's on, until the big hand gets from 1 to 2. And when you think, if you phrase it from 1 to 2, it doesn't sound like that much time to them, even though we're talking about 5 minutes for our biggest swimmers. You're only doing this activity from when the big hand's on the 1, and then when it's on the 2, we finish and we're doing the next thing.
Yeah, we also have a visual timer that's a 30-minute, because some of our children need that countdown. It's 5 minutes until, and they look at the sand, and then it's on a 30 minutes. So they soon get to know that when the sand is nearly run out, then that's time to get out the pool. Getting in the pool, getting out the pool, the transitions is a time where, and I know we were just touching a few things on transitions. What's your shared experience?
So I will go directly back to what we were talking about, and that is planning through the transition to what's on the other side. So if you know that that child is, I'm going to talk about an individual, we can apply this to a class situation. So if you know that that child always rides the bus home from swimming, then you can start talking before we get to our goodbye song, before we get to our finishing activity. Start talking about, what do you see on the bus when you go home? When I leave the swimming pool, I go past the library, I see the trees. Oh, have you seen the blossoms out? Those sorts of things, so that they start thinking about that part of their day. And then when it comes to the transition, it can be a simple, okay, now it's time to get out. Oh, I wonder, what was it you said that you might see on the way home today? And it just makes it a lot smoother, because it's less jarring to suddenly go from, now I'm in the pool, to now I'm getting changed. They're thinking about the future beyond that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think for babies and young children to bring that into context of really just, thinking about what is going to make that transition so much more comfortable. Are the towels poolside? Do we have a nice dressing gown? Because if we are cold, are we going to be rushing? And then that might mean that we're not handling our little ones as much, Is there something yummy to eat on the way home? And all sometimes it's just the small details, isn't it? And the noise in the changing rooms, if we can actually use our quieter voices and to be able to regulate ourselves for our children, because that can really be quite alert in the after part, can't it?
And I do think that those things that you've talked about just then, and all of the things that we can put in place in the pool, they can definitely be tools for our parents as well, for their own regulation strategies, and then also for tools that they can use at home. Because if they see it work with us, then they'll think, oh, I wonder if that would work when we've got to get out the door and go to the dentist, for example. No, you're empowering them.
I always think the pool, I always have a bit of an expression, the pool is so much more than a place to learn to swim, because we're just learning so much, aren't we, what we can take home. So that's regulation, resources, transitions. Is there anything else that we'd like to add to our little sensory pot?
I just think, speaking about Autism Acceptance Month particularly, those things that really, really help are definitely setting up for regulation, visual supports, and more visual supports, breaking down tasks into look or listen, not look and listen. and then supporting those transitions. And for anybody who is thinking, why are they saying autism acceptance and not autism awareness?
Yeah.
This is very much an autistic community-led preference. It's really important that we do listen to autistic individuals and groups on their language preferences and are respectful of those. Most of us have been taught, for example, to use person first language. So we might say a person with a disability, but the preference across the autistic community is identity first language, because a lot of autistic people feel that their identity can't be separated from the fact that they have an autistic brain. So it's taking the time to learn those little things and being respectful of it in our practice, in our advertising, in our social media.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think it's you know, we're on a little bit of a catch up, aren't we? So it's so important to, you know, as you say, empower ourselves using the right language, and also creating really inclusive, safe environments, really. So that's wonderful. So what are you up to at the moment, Steph? Tell us.
I'm over in Northern Ireland at the moment, where
Wow.
I have been working with the wonderful swimming buddies on their Easter programme. I've been doing a lot of mentoring with their team.
Nice.
I've been doing a lot of mentoring behind the scenes, looking at social stories for people, looking at how to support people if they've got a swimmer that they're not quite sure where the way forward is, but they don't want to give up on them. So that's a service that's quite new to Swirl at the moment that we're offering. We've got some big exciting things in terms of our products, but that's all firmly under wraps for now.
Okay. Wait for that one then.
we are just plowing on, doing our best to improve how inclusive swim lessons as a whole can be.
Yeah, no, I'm on your page completely. What I'll do, if anybody's interested, because I think the service you offer, and as you say, if you're doing individual mentoring and support, that's wonderful. I'll signpost people to yourself. Obviously they know Aqua Sensory and our resource bank as well. We've got like a very small little like sign in for the pool, and we've got our own little like visual stories as well, and they're all really readily and accessible. So you know, it's signposting, isn't it, and making sure that our aquatic community has everything that they need, really.
And you know, if we don't have the answer, we will find somebody that does. And that's how we work. We're not going to claim to know everything, because we don't. We're all on this incredible learning journey where every day we find out something new, and then we can implement it and empower ourselves and other people. And I think it's really important that we do reach across the community and signpost to the people who are the experts.
Definitely. Well, it's been wonderful to talk today, and as I say, I'll pop all the little links in, and if anybody has got any questions at all, you know, just feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much, Jo.
You're welcome.